The affair began, like most scandals, with rumors I chose to ignore, whispers at Lady Pemberton's garden party, knowing glances exchanged when I entered a room. My lady's maid, Sarah, carefully not meeting my eyes when she helped me dress for yet another evening alone while my husband attended business in London. I was the Duchess of Winthrop, married to Edmund Sinclair for 9 years. I managed 3 estates, hosted political dinners that advanced his career, and maintained the gracious facade expected of women in my position. I had done everything a duchess should do, everything except acknowledge that my husband was conducting a very public affair with Lady Victoria Ashworth, a widow 10 years my junior with auburn hair, and a reputation for capturing the attention of wealthy, powerful men. The rumors became impossible to ignore when my sister-in-law, Catherine, arrived for tea one Tuesday afternoon with barely concealed urgency written across her face. "Eleanor, we need to talk," she said the moment the servants left us alone in my sitting room. "If this is about Edmund and Lady Ashworth, I already know," I replied calmly, pouring tea as if we were discussing the weather. Catherine blinked in surprise. "You know, and you are doing nothing. What would you have me do? Create a scene? Divorce proceedings would ruin both our reputations. This is not a situation with simple solutions. Eleanor, he is humiliating you. Everyone in London knows. They are not even being discreet anymore. He took her to the theater last week, to the theater where everyone could see them together." Set down my teacup with controlled precision. "I am aware of their theater outing. I read about it in the society pages." "You are not furious." "I am many things, Catherine. Furious is one of them. But fury without strategy is merely noise." She studied me with new understanding. "You have a plan." "I am considering my options." What I did not tell Catherine was that I had been considering my options for the past 3 months. Since the night Edmund had come home reeking of Victoria's distinctive jasmine perfume and had not even bothered to fabricate an excuse. I had spent those months consulting quietly with my solicitor, reviewing the terms of my marriage settlement, and taking careful inventory of exactly what was mine versus what belonged to the Winthrop estate. The results had been illuminating. My dowry of £40,000 had been absorbed into Edmund's assets upon our marriage, as was customary. But my maternal grandmother had left me a substantial trust fund, £25,000 held separately and legally protected from my husband's control. I also owned outright a small estate in Devonshire that had been my mother's family property, passed directly to me and deeded in my maiden name. I had resources. More than Edmund realized. I also had something else he underestimated: patience and the ability to plan several moves ahead. The confrontation I had been avoiding arrived on a Thursday evening when Edmund returned from yet another week in London. He found me in the library where I had been reviewing estate accounts. "Eleanor, we need to discuss something." Looked up from the ledgers, my expression pleasant. "Of course, Edmund. What did you wish to discuss?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I know there have been rumors about myself and Lady Ashworth. I wanted to address them directly." "How thoughtful of you." "Please proceed." "The rumors are not entirely without foundation. Victoria and I have developed a connection, a deep connection. I did not intend for it to happen, but I cannot deny my feelings." I waited, saying nothing. Let him fill the silence. "You must understand, Eleanor, that men have certain needs, needs that are not always met within the bounds of marriage. This is not a reflection on you. You have been an excellent duchess. But Victoria understands me in ways that—" "Edmund," I interrupted calmly, "are you trying to convince me to accept your mistress? Is that the purpose of this conversation?" "I am trying to be honest with you. I care for Victoria. I wish to continue seeing her. I am asking you to be reasonable about this." "Reasonable." "Other wives of our station manage these situations with grace. They understand that a man's physical needs are separate from his respect and affection for his wife. I am not asking for a divorce. I am simply asking for understanding." I closed the ledger I had been reviewing and gave him my full attention. "You want me to ignore your very public affair with a woman half of London knows you are betting. You want me to smile and play the gracious duchess while you humiliate me at theaters and dinner parties, and you are calling this being reasonable. You are being dramatic. I am being discreet. You took her to the theater, Edmund. That is the opposite of discreet. You are parading her around London like she already occupies my position. His jaw tightened. You are making this more difficult than it needs to be. Real wives understand these things. They forgive their husbands' indiscretions and maintain the marriage with dignity. Something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. Real wives forgive, I repeated. How interesting. Tell me, Edmund, what do real husbands do? Do they honor their marriage vows? Do they treat their wives with respect? Or do they simply expect forgiveness without offering anything in return? I am offering you the continued security of this marriage. Your position, your status, everything you have built as the Duchess of Winthrop. All I ask is that you be mature about my relationship with Victoria. I stood, my full height giving me the advantage as I faced him across the desk. Here is what I am offering you, Edmund. Boundaries. Boundaries. Yes, you may continue your affair with Lady Ashworth if you must. I will not create a public scandal by demanding a divorce, but in exchange you will adhere to certain conditions. He looked taken aback. Clearly, he had expected tears or capitulation, not negotiations. What conditions? First, you will be discreet. No more theater outings or public displays. Your relationship with her remains private, or I will make our marital problems very public indeed. You cannot threaten me. I am not threatening. I am setting boundaries. Second, you will allocate £15,000 to a separate account in my name. Consider it compensation for the humiliation you have already caused. That is extortion. That is the price of my continued cooperation. Third, you will not bring Lady Ashworth to any of our properties. She does not set foot in my homes. Fourth, you will attend all important social functions with me as your wife, presenting a united front to society. And fifth, you will never, ever ask me to entertain her or acknowledge her socially. Edmund's face had gone red with fury. These demands are outrageous. You are my wife. You do not dictate terms to me. I am your wife and the Duchess of Winthrop. I have managed your estates, advanced your political career, and maintained your social standing for 9 years. You seem to have forgotten that I bring considerable value to this marriage beyond my mere presence. If you wish to keep both your wife and your mistress, these are my conditions. If I refuse, then I will pursue a legal separation. It will be messy and public and will damage both our reputations considerably. But I have independent means, Edmund. I can survive a scandal, can you? Can your political ambitions withstand the scrutiny of a very public marital collapse? We stared at each other across the desk, years of unspoken resentment suddenly visible in the space between us. You have changed, he said finally. You were never this hard. You are right. I was soft, accommodating. I believed that being a good wife meant accepting whatever treatment I received. But watching you parade your mistress around London while expecting me to smile and forgive taught me something valuable. That forgiveness without boundaries is not virtue. It is simply permission for continued disrespect. I need time to consider these demands. You have until Monday. After that, I contact my solicitor and we begin separation proceedings. He left my library without another word, and I sank back into my chair, my hands trembling now that the confrontation was over. I had done it. I had set boundaries with my husband. I had demanded respect instead of begging for it. The question now was whether he would accept my terms or call my bluff, except it was not a bluff. I was entirely prepared to pursue a legal separation if necessary. I had already consulted with my solicitor about the process. I knew exactly what I stood to lose and what I would keep. I was done being the accommodating duchess who swallowed her pain and smiled for society. Edmund's answer came Sunday evening, delivered in writing rather than in person. Eleanor, I have considered your demands and find them, while extreme, marginally acceptable. I will arrange for the transfer of £15,000 to your designated account. I will also endeavor to maintain greater discretion in my relationship with Victoria. However, I want you to understand that I will not end this relationship. She has become important to me in ways I cannot easily explain. I hope that in time, you will come to accept this situation with more grace. I am grateful that you are willing to maintain the appearance of our marriage for the sake of both our positions in society. Read the letter 3 times, analyzing every word choice. Endeavor to maintain greater discretion. was not a promise to comply with my first condition. "I hope you will come to accept this situation with more grace," was a passive-aggressive suggestion that I was still being unreasonable. But he had agreed to the financial compensation and to maintaining appearances. It was not everything I wanted, but it was more than I had possessed before setting my boundaries. I wrote a brief response. "Edmund, I accept your agreement to the terms outlined. The £15,000 should be transferred by the end of the month. I will continue to fulfill my duties as Duchess of Winthrop in all public capacities. However, understand that my tolerance for your relationship with Lady Ashworth is conditional on your adherence to the boundaries I have set. Any violation of those terms, particularly regarding discretion, will result in immediate action on my part. Eleanor, it was not forgiveness. It was a business arrangement. And somehow, that felt more honest than the fiction of marital harmony we had been performing for years. The money was transferred within 2 weeks. £15,000 in an account accessible only to me. It joined my grandmother's trust fund, giving me £40,000 of completely independent assets, financial security that belonged to me alone. Edmund returned to London the following week, ostensibly for parliamentary sessions, but undoubtedly to resume his affair with Victoria. I remained at our country estate in Kent, managing the harvest and the estate business that Edmund had always found tedious. I also began building a life that was separate from my role as his Duchess. I started attending lectures at the British Museum on topics that interested me: ancient history, natural sciences, literature. I joined a ladies' literary society that met monthly to discuss books and ideas. I became more involved in charitable work, particularly organizations that helped women in difficult circumstances. I discovered that I enjoyed my own company, that I had interests and passions beyond managing my husband's estates and hosting his political dinners. I was 34 years old and learning for the first time what it felt like to have autonomy within my own life. 3 months after our confrontation, Catherine visited again. This time, she arrived with news. "Edmund and Lady Ashworth have been seen together again, at the opera, sitting in a private box, quite openly displaying their affection." I set down my embroidery with controlled calm. "I see. Thank you for telling me. Eleanor, are you not going to do anything? He is violating the terms you set, which means I now have grounds to pursue the legal separation I threatened." "You truly would do it, Catherine." He gave me his word that he would maintain discretion. He broke that word within 3 months. What message does it send if I simply accept this violation? That my boundaries are negotiable, that he can agree to terms and then ignore them without consequence. But a legal separation would be such a scandal. Yes, it would be, for both of us, but I am no longer willing to prioritize avoiding scandal over maintaining my own dignity. I sent Edmund a letter that same afternoon. "Edmund, I have been informed that you attended the opera with Lady Ashworth in a manner visible to general society. This constitutes a direct violation of the discretion clause in our agreement. As I indicated in my original terms, any violation would result in immediate action. I am therefore instructing my solicitor to begin proceedings for a legal separation. You had an opportunity to maintain both your marriage and your affair by simply honoring basic boundaries. You chose not to. The consequences are yours to bear." Eleanor, his response arrived within 3 days, and for the first time I heard genuine panic in his words. "Eleanor, please, you must reconsider. A legal separation would destroy everything I have worked for politically. My colleagues would never take me seriously. The scandal would follow me for years. I made a mistake. I should have been more careful, but surely this does not warrant such extreme measures. Can we not discuss this rationally? I am begging you to reconsider. I will do anything you ask. Just do not pursue this separation." Edmund, I read the letter while sitting in my favorite spot in the garden, sunlight filtering through the leaves above me. For 9 years, I had accommodated Edmund's needs, his schedule, his priorities. I had made myself smaller to fit into the space he allowed me. Now he was begging me to reconsider, enforcing the boundaries I had clearly stated. The old Eleanor would have relented, would have been moved by his pleading, would have convinced herself that perhaps she had been too harsh. too unforgiving. But I was not the old Eleanor anymore. I drafted my response carefully. Edmund, when you violated our agreement by publicly displaying your affair with Lady Ashworth, you demonstrated that my boundaries meant nothing to you. You had a choice between respecting my terms and maintaining the appearance of our marriage. You chose to prioritize your relationship with her over honoring your word to me. However, I am willing to offer you one final opportunity to comply with the original terms. If you immediately end all public displays with Lady Ashworth, commit in writing to maintaining absolute discretion, and transfer an additional £10,000 to my account as penalty for your breach, I will postpone separation proceedings. But understand this is your final chance. If you violate these terms again, I will not issue another warning. I will simply proceed with legal action. The choice is yours. Eleanor I included a deadline. He had 2 weeks to comply or I would file for separation. The 2 weeks passed slowly. I went about my daily routines, managing the estate, attending my lectures and literary society meetings, pursuing my charitable work. I was busy and surprisingly content despite the uncertainty hovering over my marriage. On the 13th day, Edmund arrived at the estate unannounced. I received him in the formal drawing room, maintaining physical and emotional distance. Eleanor, I have come to discuss your ultimatum in person. There is nothing to discuss. The terms are clear. Either you comply or you do not. You are asking me to choose between you and Victoria. No, Edmund. I am asking you to honor the boundaries you agreed to. You may continue your affair. I have accepted that reality. All I require is discretion and respect for the terms we negotiated. £1,000 is excessive. £1,000 is the penalty for breaking your word. Consider it cheap compared to the cost of a legal separation, both financially and socially. He paced the room, agitation visible in every movement. I cannot simply end my relationship with Victoria. I have genuine feelings for her. I did not ask you to end it. I asked you to stop parading it publicly. If you cannot manage that basic level of discretion, then you care more about displaying your affair than about maintaining your marriage or your political career. You are punishing me for being honest about my needs. I am enforcing consequences for violating an agreement. Those are not the same thing. We stared at each other across the drawing room, 9 years of marriage reduced to this standoff. What happened to the woman I married? Edmund asked quietly. She would never have been this cold. Woman you married believed that being a good wife meant accepting whatever treatment she received. That woman learned through your repeated disrespect that forgiveness without boundaries is not love. It is self-destruction. So I became someone different. Someone who values herself enough to demand basic respect. If I agree to your terms, what then? Do we simply continue this cold arrangement forever? We continue as partners in a marriage that serves both our interests. You gain the social respectability of a wife and duchess. I gain the security and position of being married, but we no longer pretend to be something we are not. That sounds miserable. Miserable than the alternative, I assure you. At least this arrangement is honest. Edmund left the next day. 3 days later, the money appeared in my account. Along with it came a letter, written in his hand but clearly drafted with care. Eleanor, I have complied with your terms. £10,000 has been transferred to your account. I commit in writing to maintaining absolute discretion in my relationship with Lady Ashworth. I will not appear with her in public settings where we might be observed together. I acknowledge that I violated our previous agreement and that your response was appropriate given my breach. I understand that this is my final opportunity to preserve our marriage arrangement. I hope that in time, we might find a way to coexist with less tension. But I accept that such reconciliation is entirely dependent on my honoring the boundaries you have established. Edmund I filed the letter carefully with my other important documents. It was not an apology, exactly. But it was acknowledgement, recognition that my boundaries were real and enforceable. That was progress. Over the following year, our arrangement settled into a functional rhythm. Edmund maintained his affair with Victoria, but he kept it private. We appeared together at necessary social functions, presenting a united front to society. To outside observers, we were a perfectly ordinary aristocratic couple. In private, we lived largely separate lives. Edmund spent most of his time in London. I remained in Kent, managing the estates and building my independent life. We were not happy, precisely, but we were not miserable either. We had found an equilibrium based on clearly defined boundaries and mutual benefit rather than affection. It was not what I had imagined marriage would be when I had accepted Edmund's proposal at 25. I had been romantic enough then to hope for love, or at least genuine companionship. But 9 years and one very public affair had disabused me of romantic notions. This practical arrangement, built on boundaries rather than emotions, was more honest than the fiction we had been living. And honesty, I had learned, was more valuable than romance. 18 months after I first set boundaries with Edmund, I attended a lecture at the British Museum on Roman engineering. The speaker was Professor James Hartford, a scholar in his early 40s known for making ancient history accessible to general audiences. His lecture was brilliant. He brought aqueducts and road-building techniques to life with humor and passion. I found myself completely engaged, taking notes, formulating questions. During the reception afterward, I approached him to discuss a point he had made about Roman concrete. Professor Hartford, your comments about the longevity of Roman construction were fascinating. I have read that modern engineers still cannot replicate some of their techniques. He turned to me with interest. You have read about Roman engineering. That is an unusual interest for. He stopped himself, clearly realizing he had been about to say, for a woman. For anyone not professionally involved in the field, I finished diplomatically. Perhaps, but I find the intersection of engineering and empire fascinating, how physical infrastructure both enabled and symbolized Roman power. His eyes lit with genuine enthusiasm. Exactly. The roads were not just transportation. They were political statements, demonstrations of control and capability. Have you read Frontinus? We talked for 30 minutes about ancient engineering, Roman politics, and the relationship between infrastructure and imperial power. It was the most intellectually stimulating conversation I had experienced in years. As the reception was ending, Professor Hartford said, "Your Grace, if I may be so bold, there is a small society of scholars and enthusiasts who meet monthly to discuss ancient history. We would be delighted to have someone of your obvious knowledge join us. I would enjoy that very much." I began attending the Historical Society meetings monthly. The group included professors, writers, and educated enthusiasts, about equally divided between men and women. We discussed everything from ancient military strategy to domestic life in Pompeii. Professor Hartford, I discovered, was a widower. His wife had died in childbirth 5 years earlier, along with their child. He had buried himself in his work afterward, teaching and writing and slowly healing. We became friends over shared intellectual interests. Then, gradually, something deeper began to develop. Affection built on genuine compatibility and respect. 2 years after setting boundaries with Edmund, James Hartford kissed me in the British Museum library after a particularly spirited debate about Julius Caesar's military tactics. "I apologize," he said immediately, stepping back. "That was inappropriate. You are married. I should not have presumed." "James," I interrupted gently, "I am married in name only. My husband has a mistress he has been seeing for years. We maintain the appearance of marriage for social reasons, but we have no romantic relationship. Still, your reputation is my concern, not yours, and I am very glad you kissed me." It was the beginning of something I had thought impossible at 36. A genuine romantic connection with someone who valued my mind as much as my position, who was interested in my thoughts about ancient Rome and modern politics, who saw me as a whole person rather than merely a duchess. James and I were careful, discreet. We met at museum lectures and historical society gatherings, always in public settings where our friendship seemed perfectly innocent. Occasionally, we managed more private moments, stolen hours where we could talk and touch and simply be together without the weight of social observation. It was not a conventional relationship. But then, nothing about my life was conventional anymore. Edmund noticed, eventually. Or perhaps someone reported back to him about the history professor who seemed particularly attentive to his wife. He confronted me during one of his rare visits to the Kent estate. "There are rumors about you and some professor. Hartford, I believe his name is." Set down my teacup calmly. "James Hartford is a friend and fellow member of a historical society I belong to. We share intellectual interests. People are suggesting it is more than intellectual." How interesting. Tell me, Edmund, when people suggested your relationship with Lady Ashworth was more than friendship, did you deny it? His jaw tightened. "That is different." "How is it different?" "You are my wife. The Duchess of Winthrop. You have a reputation to maintain." "You are my husband, the Duke of Winthrop. Yet somehow your affair with Lady Ashworth has been socially acceptable for years, while a rumored friendship with a scholar threatens my reputation. Why is that, do you suppose? You know perfectly well that different standards apply to men and women." "Yes, I am aware of the hypocrisy. What I am asking is whether you truly expect me to adhere to standards you have been violating for years." "You having an affair with this professor," I considered lying, considered protecting myself with plausible deniability. Then I remembered my commitment to honesty and boundaries. "That is none of your business, Edmund. You gave up the right to question my personal life when you installed a mistress in yours. We have an arrangement. You maintain your relationship with Lady Ashworth discreetly. I maintain my dignity and independence. What I do with that independence is my concern alone. So you are having an affair. I am building a life separate from this marriage, just as you have done. I am simply doing it with more discretion than you ever managed." Edmund stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. "When did you become so hard?" "When I realized that softness was getting me nothing but pain. You wanted a wife who would forgive your affair and maintain appearances. I became that wife. But I also became someone who demanded equal freedom within our arrangement. If you cannot accept that, perhaps we should reconsider whether this marriage serves either of our interests." He left without responding, and I returned to my correspondence. I was done apologizing for having boundaries, done feeling guilty for building a life of my own. Edmund had taught me, inadvertently, that marriage could be many things. It did not have to be romantic love or companionship. It could be a practical arrangement that served mutual interests while allowing both parties independent lives. That was what our marriage had become, and I was, surprisingly, content with that reality. 3 years after I first set boundaries with Edmund, I sat in my private sitting room reading a letter from James. He was in Rome for research, sending me detailed descriptions of ancient sites and observations about how much better our visit together would have been than his solitary exploration. I wrote back describing a lecture I had attended on Byzantine architecture, wishing he had been there to debate my interpretations with his typical passionate disagreement. We maintained our relationship through letters, careful meetings, and the understanding that what we had was precious, but necessarily limited by my marriage to Edmund. I was 37 years old. I had been married for 12 years to a man I no longer loved and who had never truly loved me. But I had built something valuable from the wreckage of romantic expectations: independence, intellectual stimulation, genuine friendship and affection with someone who valued me, financial security, meaningful work managing estates and supporting charitable causes. My life was not what I had imagined at 25 when I married Edmund, full of hope and romantic dreams. It was better, because it was mine, built on my terms, protected by boundaries I had established and enforced. Edmund had said real wives forgive. I had learned that real duchesses set boundaries. And that lesson had transformed everything. Did Elena's journey from accommodation to self-advocacy inspire you? Like this video if you believe boundaries are an act of self-respect, not selfishness. Comment below. Would you have set the same terms? How would you have responded to Edmund's betrayal? Subscribe for more stories of women who refuse to accept disrespect disguised as inevitability. Share with anyone who needs permission to enforce their own boundaries, no matter what society expects. Hit that notification bell for more tales of duchesses who chose dignity over doormat status and built extraordinary lives on their own terms.